Welcome to the Daily AI News Digest. Today is June 2nd, 2026. I'm your host, and today we're cutting through the noise to look at the concrete market realities, regulatory shifts, and structural hardware updates that are actually defining the artificial intelligence sector right now. But first, a quick note that today's explainer is sponsored by bestai.org, the premier intelligence portal for tracking verified developments in AI. We have a highly structured briefing for you today. We'll be running through the daily AI headlines, the biggest market moves, tangible product realities out of Computex, the latest regulation signals, the analyst take, and finally our market outlook. Let's get right into it. Starting with Section 1, Daily AI Headlines. And that leads us straight into Section 2, the biggest moves today. The sheer volume of private capital being deployed into foundation models right now is, frankly, staggering. Let's look at the numbers. Following a massive $65 billion Series H funding round, led by some very heavy institutional players, Anthropic has now reached a post-money valuation of $965 billion. This is a crucial data point because it effectively allows them to overtake OpenAI's $852 billion valuation. As of today, that cements Anthropic as the world's most valuable artificial intelligence startup. So, what's the actual roadmap for them now? Yesterday, Anthropic confidentially submitted a draft S1 to the SEC. Let's realistically map out this timeline. Following that draft submission, the standard SEC review period typically takes a matter of weeks. Once a public S1 is filed, complete with those heavily anticipated audited financials, a roadshow is required 15 days prior to listing. If you followed that timeline, it gives them the option to target an October 2026 IPO, though, of course, it doesn't lock in a definitive date or price just yet. Meanwhile, over in the public markets, Alphabet is actively demonstrating the financial viability of its own massive infrastructure investments. Google just reported a highly significant 800% year-over-year revenue increase generated specifically from products built on its generative AI models. To put that into perspective, AI overviews are now embedded in roughly 55% of all web searches. This data effectively neutralizes prior market concerns that AI integration would severely cannibalize Google's core search monopoly. For institutional investors, this is the hard proof they've been waiting for, that incumbent tech can, in fact, successfully monetize generative infrastructure. Moving on to Section 3, Product and Model Realities. Let's look at the concrete hardware updates coming out of Computex today, specifically focusing on two major, yet opposing, architectural approaches. On the data center side, Intel unveiled their rack-scale AI infrastructure. This is built on their new Xeon 6 Plus processors utilizing the 18A node, and it's designed specifically for massive scale-out workloads. Conversely, NVIDIA is taking a different route by pushing compute directly to the edge. Their new client-focused RTX Spark architecture supports up to 128 gigabytes of unified memory, which is optimized for heavy local inference. To see how this hardware is actually hitting the consumer market, we can look at Microsoft's announcement of the Surface Laptop Ultra. If we strip away the marketing speak, these specifications are built strictly for demanding workloads. The system runs on the NVIDIA RTX Spark system on a chip, which pairs a 20-core ARM CPU with a Blackwell architecture GPU. By utilizing that 128 gigabytes of unified memory, the machine achieves 1 petaflop of AI compute capacity. Practically speaking, this allows developers to run complex, multimodal workflows and massive 120 billion parameter models entirely locally, completely removing the reliance on cloud infrastructure. Next up, Section 4, Regulation and Policy Signals. We had a major policy shift today. President Donald Trump signed an executive order establishing a 30-day voluntary pre-release review window for frontier AI models. Now, this is material compromise from a prior draft that was circulated back in May, which initially proposed a 90-day review period. The administration essentially reduced this window over very real concerns that a 90-day delay would negatively impact the competitiveness of American labs, especially when positioned against state-directed programs operating in China. So, how does this compliance process actually work? It builds out sequentially. First, developers build the model. Then, they can opt to grant the federal government secure access up to 30 days before public deployment. During that window, the NSA conducts classified benchmarking to rigorously evaluate the model's cyber capabilities. Once that's clear, the model is released to trusted partners. Crucially here, this entire process remains voluntary and deliberately avoids any mandatory licensing frameworks. Down at the state level, however, legal liabilities are rapidly escalating. The state of Florida, led by Attorney General James Youthmere, just filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against OpenAI and its CEO, Sam Altman. The state is alleging that the company misrepresented the safety of the ChatGPT platform and demonstrated negligence by failing to restrict dangerous interactions. They specifically cite chat logs that were allegedly used to plan a mass shooting at a Tallahassee university. In response to the suit, OpenAI maintains that its systems are rigorously trained to actively reject requests that enable violence, and they emphasize that they utilize strict protocols to notify law enforcement of any credible, imminent threats. That brings us to Section 5, the analyst take. Going back to that new executive order, the institutional focus is heavily zeroed in on the exact definition of a covered frontier model. Analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations point out a critical distinction. This designation doesn't just apply to a standalone model sitting in an isolated testing environment. It applies to the entire deployed AI system. That includes its data pipelines and its architecture, specifically when performing at the state-of-the-art in domains relevant to national security. The actual trigger for a cybersecurity review is a system presenting unresolved challenges across security, reliability, or defensibility. Then Nguyen, a Sear Fellow for AI at the Council on Foreign Relations, provided a very grounded, sober perspective on what the government's true objective is here. He noted, the executive order's voluntary framework is the mechanism that converts that opacity into observability. The core underlying issue is that right now, frontier capabilities are largely only visible to the private labs building them. The government is essentially attempting to establish a secure standardized channel to evaluate these highly opaque systems long before they integrate with critical infrastructure. Now watch how this tension plays out in actual defense contracting, because it's a fascinating business paradox. The Department of War just officially designated Anthropic a national security supply chain risk. Why? Because the company refused to allow its models to be used in fully autonomous weapons. Yet, ironically enough, Anthropic's cloud remains actively embedded in Palantir's Maven targeting system right at this very moment. Defense officials openly acknowledge this contradiction, admitting they continue to rely on Claude simply because they currently lack a comparable reasoning engine that can support their high-velocity operations. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Market Outlook. As Anthropic prepares to pull back the curtain with their public S-1 filing, institutional investors are looking way past the standard top-line revenue growth. What they really want to examine is the true cost of serving that revenue. They're looking closely at the capital intensity of the required compute expansion, and most importantly, they're looking for a realistic, proven path to profitability for a pure-play frontier lab. That concludes today's Explainer. As the sector waits for Anthropic's public S1, the ultimate question really remains: will enterprise demand for these frontier models actually translate into durable, profitable margins, or is the market simply subsidizing an unsustainable compute bubble? Thank you for joining us for the Daily AI News Digest. For more grounded market realities, be sure to visit our sponsor at bestai.org. Until next time, keep your focus on the data.